Welcome to the Art of Being a Mum podcast, where I, Alison Newman, a singer, songwriter, and Aussie mum of two, enjoys honest and inspiring conversations with artists and creators about the joys and issues they've encountered while trying to be a mum and continue to create. You'll hear themes like the mental juggle, changes in identity, how their work's been influenced by motherhood, mum guilt, cultural norms, and we also stray into territory such as the patriarchy, feminism, and capitalism. You can find links to my guests and topics we discussed in the show notes, along with a link to the music played, how to get in touch, and a link to join our supportive and lively community on Instagram. I'll always put a trigger warning if we discuss sensitive topics on the podcast, but if at any time you're concerned about your mental health, I urge you to talk to those around you, reach out to health professionals, or seek out resources online. I've compiled a list of international resources which can be accessed on the podcast landing page, alisonnewman.net/podcast. The Art of Being a Mum would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and water which this podcast is recorded on, as being the Boandik people in the Barron region of South Australia. I'm working on land that was never ceded. Hello and welcome to the second of my two special episodes to commemorate Father's Day here in Australia. In this episode, I welcome Zach Mander to the podcast. Zach is a comedian, radio announcer, and a father of two from Brisbane, Australia. Zach has hosted national radio shows on stations such as 2Day FM and Fox FM, and he specialises in clever and offbeat content. He is the self-proclaimed Bluey detective, delving into the much-loved Australian kids show and providing many witty observations. If you don't already follow Zach on his social media, I urge you to do so. He has a great sense of humour with really relatable content for parents and Bluey fans alike. I hope you enjoyed today's special episode. Thank you so much for coming on today, Zach. Such a pleasure to welcome you to our special Father's Day episode.
Yes, thanks, Alison. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for allowing me in your mum's space.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You'd be surprised, actually, how popular the Dad's episodes are. At one point, it was the second most popular episode, one that I'd done a couple of years ago. So,
oh, really?
Okay. I think people are interested to hear from the other side. So, yeah, thank you for indulging us.
Pleasure.
So you're a comedian, a radio host, podcaster. How long have you been doing this sort of stuff for?
Well, since I was in high school, actually. So I started, we had a pseudo high school radio station where we just really had big speakers that blasted music across the school, and we would talk in between. So it was kind of like fake radio, and that was the first time I ever did anything to do with radio. And really, I've been doing that ever since. So 15 plus years. And also in school, I'd carry a video camera around. This is, well before we had cameras on phones, but I did have this like little compact one that would fit in my pocket. And so I'd take that around and film videos and things like that. So it's been a long time. I actually did stand up in high school as well, come to think of it. We had a talent quest, and I did stand up a few times in high school.
Yeah. So we sort of like, as a kid as well, like sort of gathering people's attention by making jokes and doing funny things and that sort of stuff?
No, not really. It wasn't until high school that, I don't know why, actually. That's interesting. I remember being very interested in funny things. So I had a teacher, Miss Munro, when I was in year 5, and she was funny. And I remember her saying to my parents at a parent-teacher interview, she said, Zach gets my jokes and the other kids just stare at me.
Yeah, right.
And, I was really interested in people who were funny, and I found it captivating and interesting, and it, tickled my brain. But it wasn't until later that, I tried to make funny things myself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, because everyone has such a different sense of humour of what they find funny. Yeah, and I think some of the like I work in early childhood education, and some of the best relationships I have with kids are the ones who get my jokes, because I have this ongoing joke with kids. They come up to you and they'll say, "Can you put my shoes on?" And I'll go, "Nah, they don't fit. They're too small for me." And they'll just look at me like, And the ones that laugh, I'm like, righto. I like
Yeah,
you.
true. It is interesting, isn't it? You said like everyone has a different sense of humor, and I guess they call it a sense of humor, I guess for a reason,
Mm,
that we all have a different sense of it.
yeah.
The kids are particularly interesting. Like my daughter's 2.5, and I'm noticing her laugh at different things now. She'll laugh at things on TV, and I'm looking at it and I'm going like, what? I don't really understand what the joke is. What is captivating you here? And
Yeah.
so, uh, yeah, it's really interesting how that develops.
Mm. Yeah, and I feel if I can pass on my warped sense of humor to my children, I'll be very proud. Just sort of,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that would be a very proud moment when
yeah,
your kids start making jokes.
yeah. I sort of feel like it's a good way. I don't know. You tend to see the world a bit differently. I think if you've got that, not necessarily. I mean, comedy is an example, but if you can understand things or see things in a different way to what other people see, it's sort of. It's. I think it's a good way to go through life, sort of questioning things. And like you said, why does your daughter find that funny? Like, you've got that inquiring mind of, you know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, my wife's a psychologist,
Ah, right. That'd be
and
interesting.
it is interesting. And in some ways, I see similarities, like in I observing and identifying patterns.
Hmm.
And then I think if you make entertainment or funny things, it's like you then comment, subvert, um, make a joke about those patterns. Whereas I see a very similarity with her, but she will identify patterns and then, you know, uh, find meanings and, help the person
Yeah.
um, in their life around that type of pattern of behavior. But in some ways, I'm like they kind of start in the same area. It's like
Mm.
observation,
Yeah.
um, identifying something interesting, but then they kind of divert. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it is interesting how it can go different ways from the
Yeah.
same base.
Yeah. And I was about to say, your wife's probably not making jokes to the people she's counseling.
Probably not. I mean, maybe in some instances if that was appropriate, but
Yeah.
mostly I'd say no.
So I'm interested to know, like, this you talked about this observational humor. I'm not really a historian when it comes to comedy. Like, I know what I find funny and I know what I don't. But when Jerry Seinfeld come along and he'd just make his observational style where he'd just say, "What's the go with such and such?" Was he like the first guy that started doing that, of like just straight out that
I don't,
style?
yeah, I don't know. He would have been very early, I think. So, he would have started in the 80s. That was a real stand-up comedy boom.
Hmm.
And he definitely would have been in the first wave of that style of comedy. And he's definitely the most well known. Whether or
Mm.
not he was the first person, I'm not sure. But I also think that, that was in a very uh, solid form.
Hmm.
But I think I kind of generally think humans have been the same since they've been around. And
Yeah.
I think, when we were in fields and stuff like that, people were, going like, what's the deal with the lion chasing us? It only ever
Yeah.
chases Doug and never Cindy or whatever. What's the deal with that?
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah, so I do think people probably found this type of thing funny for a really long time.
Mm. Yeah. No, I just thought I'd mention that. He just sprung to mind.
Yeah, I'm
So,
not sure. Probably, stand-up comedy really it existed before the 80s, but it had like a huge boom in the 80s. And that's when he came through. So I don't know, but I would assume that he was in the first.
Mm. How would you describe your style of comedy, Zach?
I don't know. I think some words I would say were like offbeat,
Yeah.
um, sarcastic, um, satirical sometimes. I would say, yeah, I'm I can identify people who like my things often sometimes when I watch something else and I see
Mhm.
something else someone has made, and I'm like, oh, that's so rather than identifying what I am, sometimes it's easier to go what you're not. So I see something else, and it's not that I don't enjoy that or don't think that's good. I'm just like, oh, that would never occur to me to make that joke or to find that interesting. And I see the people who are around that style of creator or that style of comedian, and I think that's maybe not my audience.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't really know.
No,
I'm
you've,
just
you've
trying to
you've
like,
given me a few words there,
I'm
which makes sense because I like obviously I'm a fan of yours and follow you on the socials, and yeah, it's like it is offbeat, but it's so um what's the word? It's not dry, it's not super dry, but it's not like you're not laughing at yourself necessarily. If that makes sense. You
yeah.
might,
Uh,
yeah,
I like treating one kind of framework I might say is like I like treating very silly things very seriously. That would be
yeah.
like a way that I would
Oh,
identify. So
yeah, yeah, like the Easter bonnet parade one.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, in putting a lot of effort into things that no one would usually put a lot of effort into. Those are
yeah,
the things I personally enjoy doing the most. And
yeah.
so that would probably be a reoccurring thing. And that's something that I've, yeah, enjoyed doing since I was really young. It delighted me greatly to put a real lot of effort into things that people wouldn't even ever consider. Now,
Mhm.
the irony is, I should probably put more effort into the things that like schoolwork and
Yeah,
university work. And like, instead of doing that at school, I remember one day I had this computing class that I only took because I thought I needed to.
mhm.
It wasn't because I enjoyed it at all. And it was before Friday afternoon lunchtime, and that was when we did our radio show. And I remember planning with my friends this whole like heist on how we were going to get out of the class. And so like we got someone to go up and distract the teacher. And then
Yeah.
we literally like army crawled out the door. But we weren't going to go down to the creek or behind the shed and smoke, or, we were being proactive. We went out and sat down and we came up with ideas of what we wanted to talk about at the radio show. So we're being creative and
Mm.
um, showing initiative. It just wasn't in the
In the
ways
most place.
that the school probably wanted
Yeah,
us to.
yeah. That's funny. I was going to ask when you were starting to get into your stand up, was there any particular comedians that you can recall that you sort of looked up to or were influences on your style, or was it just something naturally that just developed for you?
Well, you mentioned Jerry Seinfeld. That was when I was a kid. My parents, that's some of my earliest memories, is my parents watching and laughing at Seinfeld, the
Hmm.
TV show. And that was my first, encounter with, he does these little stand-up bits at the start. And so definitely early on, and I would even probably wager that like maybe that was some of my interest was like if you see your parents paying attention to something in my little head said like, oh, if I can do that, maybe
Mm,
I'll get attention from my parents.
yeah.
Um, and so definitely Seinfeld early on. As I grew teenage years, I was obsessed with stand-up comedy.
Hmm.
Um, I would just like listen for hours and hours and hours. When I left school and I went into an office job, I would just have stand up in my ears. This is kind of before podcasting as well, so I
Yeah.
just find these stand up clips. So people when I was younger, around that formative age, Dimitri Martin, who's an American
Yeah.
comedian,
Yeah.
very dry one-liners. At the time, I was kind of trying to emulate him a little bit. I was doing a lot of one-liners. Zach Galifianakis was another one who was doing kind of this one-line comedy.
Mhm.
I mean, there's heaps of them.
Yep.
I like Maria Bamford, who's an American comedian. I was thinking just the other night, this was never something that I formulated, but Daniel Kitson, who's a UK comedian, was like one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen.
Yep.
I saw him 10 years ago. He's very kind of like alternative and subversive, but also every comedian in Australia that you've probably heard of. Like I loved everyone. Arj
Yep.
Barker, I was a huge fan of as a teenager.
Yeah.
This is pre-internet, really. Like the internet existed, but not in the way it does now.
Mhm.
And so I would watch those gala nights,
Oh, yeah.
those, and you'd see
Yeah.
heaps of people. And I would even buy the DVDs of those gala nights, or source them from different areas, like your friends had them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was such a different world because
Oh,
now
yeah.
it'd be so easy to find and follow people. But back then,
Yeah.
you kind of had to source it out.
Yeah. It reminded me of like, because I'm 40, nearly 45, so I can relate to what you're saying about not having access to stuff. And years ago, there on one of the comedy festivals, there was this guy, and his name was Jeff Green, and like he's still going around now. But I remember at the time, like I was obsessed with he had this joke about stealing the corner of the bed or something, and like sorry, not the bed, the quilt. And I was like, I wanted to tell everyone about it, but you couldn't like just whip out your phone and like, here, look on YouTube. Because it didn't exist then. And actually, I just saw him only like a few weeks ago because he's still working, and he came down to Mount Gambier with the International Comedy Festival Roadshow, and I was like, yeah, it was not the same because he's really old now. So,
yeah, well, that's so interesting.
And I've grown up too, so what I find funny is different too.
Well, it's also, I think about this a lot. Like, as you in any creative field, staying not necessarily relevant, like it doesn't really matter if you're relevant or not, but staying fresh in yourself, I think. You do see that it happens a lot to comedians, particularly men, it seems, although the comedy scene is dominated by men anyway. But they do get to an age where it's like, it doesn't seem like you're very funny anymore. And I wonder if it could be things like comfort. I wonder, like, once comedians find money and security, like maybe that kind of edge goes away. Maybe it's complacency, or maybe, but then on the other hand, a lot of comedians kind of get funnier. Some hit their best stuff later on. And I've always thought, like, how do you stay relevant to yourself, and you're making cool stuff? And I think it's a part of it is like reinventing yourself constantly. And I think early on you take big swings because you have nothing to lose. And then once you have something to lose, I think people dial it back and they no longer take chances.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're Ricky Gervais, who just keeps taking chances all the time.
Yeah.
To a degree, though, because I guess it's predictable that he is going to do that because that's his thing now, I suppose. Also, I think like, and you would have seen it too, but I mean, more so myself, I guess, with the age difference, but like what's culturally acceptable to make jokes about has changed so much. And so I think people that their bread and butter was, particular style of comedy, which, may or may not have been appropriate at the time, they'd have to completely change their whole thing.
Yeah, there would definitely be people like that. There's a lot of people also, though, who have changed. They identify that the jokes I used to make are no longer deemed appropriate by society and even by myself. This is the comedian speaking, and they go like, I wouldn't make that joke anymore. So it is possible to. I think the idea when people go, well, you're like what the time you exist in is constantly changing. And so if you can't adapt, then I think that's the fault on the performer, not on society. Like society's constantly changing, and it's your job to reflect society and comment on that. And so if you're unable to do that in an interesting and constructive and valuable way, then maybe it's your turn is over.
Yeah, that's very well put. So, like, as a creative person, like, I'll put it from my perspective because I'm not a comedian. I like to think I say funny things, but obviously it's not my job. But as a musician, and as a songwriter, like, I feel like I've got to use my creativity to process things. When you make your comedy, are you thinking about what your audience wants, or are you literally thinking about what you want to put out there?
A balance between both, because in radio, like, radio is a medium that sells advertising whilst entertaining people, and there's a commercial reality, which is it's broadcasting. You're trying to be broadly appealing, and so you need to think of the audience. On social media, for example, you don't have to if you don't want to. However, in my opinion, like, if you are an entertainer, it's your job to entertain, and you kind of have to think of things that the audience are going to enjoy. You can be really esoteric if you want to, and do things that are really, purposely make things hard to get or very strange. And there's a position for those things, but if you want to make it your job, it's a balance. And so I'm fortunate that most of the time those two circles align pretty well. Things I want to say or things I want to do, and mostly things I think that the audience will like. Sometimes they don't. But it's not really, some people really struggle with that. I don't, because I've never really wanted to do the things that are usually things you're not allowed to do. Like I don't think not swearing, for example, inhibits me at all. Whereas that would be a big problem for some people. I can say whatever I want, and I want to swear and work blue and all these types of things. That just isn't me. So it's kind of lucky, that I don't have to change. Really, the stuff I talk about on the radio is largely the things I want to talk about. And so that's really fortunate.
Yeah, you've landed in a really good space for what you want to do. It's like, really good. On your bio on Insta, you call yourself a Bluey detective, which is really cool. I love Bluey so much, and often I'll speak to American people on this show, and they'll mention Bluey as one of their favourite shows. And I asked a pretty silly question the other day. When I asked it, I thought, you dickhead, Alison. I said, do you get all of the humour? And it was like, well, you don't know if you get all the humour because
you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. But that's something I find really interesting. Like, we say so many, like, there's so much colloquialism on Bluey. Like, got to be done, and all these little sayings. And you think, I wonder what they make of it over there.
I think generally they love it. That's like, it's very popular. It's more popular. Well, it's not more popular, but just because of America's massive size comparative to Australia, there'd be well and truly significantly more Americans who watch Bluey than Australians. And I think they do like Australians, in the way that it's kind of a strange place, and it is a strange place in a lot of ways, but it's like America but different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we've got all these slight little weird differences that make us kind of endearing to them. I think that they think we're a bit special, and they sort of take us under their wing a bit because I don't know if they feel sorry for us or what, but
Well, Australia, I think, is a strange place when you think about it. Like, it's this massive island. In like our animals are truly bizarre. They don't
mm,
occur anywhere else. If you had never seen a kangaroo or never heard that it existed, and you lived in North America and you're used to your animals, it would look like someone made it up. Like it
yeah,
would look like someone had drawn it and brought it to life. It's like
yeah.
it stands up on its back legs, but it hops. It has a massive pocket on the front. Kind of looks like a dog or a deer. Like like it's a strange place.
Yeah, yeah. Oh dear. What's your sort of favorite? I won't say your favorite episode of Bluey, but like, what's the stuff you like on there the most? Yeah, what are you drawn to mostly about Bluey, I guess?
Funnily enough, it's not necessarily the humor, although I do like the humor. The thing I enjoy most about Bluey as a parent, the thing I like the most about for my daughter is that she's watching a story, a well-crafted story,
Mhm.
and that has a beginning, middle, and end. They're well constructed, and I think that's good to show her that because, um, amongst other things, the humor. I like that, the strong female influences, um, but we watch other TV shows, and they just don't. It's just not the same. It's
Mm.
just not the same level of um, storytelling. As an adult watching along, I like when you go, hang on, are they? Do they mean this? Like they
Yeah.
have these really subtle underlying storylines that are sometimes very deep or
Mm.
very serious things. And it's never super overt. And
Mhm.
I really like that. I like going, I think they mean this. And there
Mm.
was an episode that played just the other day while we're recording this, where they go on an adventure together in their drawings.
Yep.
It's called Dragon.
Yep.
And so they all draw themselves, and then those characters go off and they become this cartoon quest or this cartoon series. And at the start of the episode, we learn that she's so good at drawing horses because of the influence of her mum.
Mm.
And, so that's just kind of not a throwaway comment, but it's kind of like 20 seconds.
Mm.
And then 6 minutes later or 7 minutes later, they finish their quest and they're getting back in the car. And Chili has been on this horse the whole time. And, you know, she, the horse doesn't get into the car and she says, "You're not coming with us, are you?" And, the horse shakes its head and then she goes, "Well, thank you for everything."
Mm.
And the horse grows wings and flies away. And I was like,
Yeah,
oh my
sorry,
goodness.
I'm
I'm
getting
like,
emotional
yeah, I'm sorry.
now.
Um,
But it
but I
does
was the
that to
same.
you,
I was
doesn't
the same, and I
it?
was like, is the horse her mum? I'm like, this
Yeah.
is really moving, and that's never overt. Like a kid doesn't pick up on it, or
Mm.
I'm sorry to make you emotional. I
Oh, no,
didn't.
it's
I didn't
okay.
mean to. Um,
Hey, Bluey
but
did it.
it made me the same way. I was saying to
Yeah.
my wife, I had like chills. I was like, are they implying? Is that? And you kind
Mm.
of, it's never hit over their head, but they're very
Yeah.
subtle things that are like very moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that is the thing. And it's about there's relationships. So it's often about it could be about their parents. Chili with her dad, where she flashes forward or
Mm.
flashes back. The dad says like it feels like just yesterday to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Bluey when she's with she meets the kid um, when she's camping and they play together and they
Oh,
plant a
yeah, Jean
seed
Paul.
and then there's
Yeah,
this
love that one.
montage of the tree growing and then she comes back as a teenager and they
Yeah.
see each other again. The flat pack episode
Oh, yeah.
where they're going through like the whole of human civilization
Mm-hmm.
and then like, is this about like a greater being? like I'm like and then even the episode about the dump where
Mm-hmm.
their drawings they throw it in the recycling so it can be pulped and made into another piece of paper for another kid to use.
Yeah.
And but at the start they're talking about does Bandit know everything? What happens I think she says, where was I before I was born, or something like that.
Mm.
And then they use the paper and the recycling as this kind of symbolism of
Yeah.
and then they're driving away and it's sunset, and they readdress that question, and
Mm.
Bandit says to Bluey, well, where do you know oh, she says, do you think my drawing was someone else's drawing before my paper was someone else's paper? And Bennett says, well, what do you think? And she looks out the window and it's like this beautiful sunset. And she goes, yeah, I think it is. And I'm
Yeah.
like, is that about I'm like, is that about like reincarnation, or is that about like, life beyond our reality?
Mm.
And I'm like, this is a kid's show.
Yeah.
Like,
It's pretty profound, isn't it? It's almost like an existential sort of exploration of humanity.
very existential.
Yeah.
And so I'm bawling on the couch, and my daughter's like, "What?
Yes.
Why are you crying?"
Yeah, and I love that you can take it at so many levels. Like you said, like it's not in your face for the kid that Chili's mum, is passing away, and I think that's a good thing about that show is it doesn't take away a parent's opportunity to talk to something about a child that they might not be ready for. So like some shows might be like literally show everything, and their mum's like, oh Jesus, I didn't want to tell my kid about this yet, but it's just taken out of your hands. But that's why I feel like Bluey's good. Like the episode with when Chili's sister came to visit, and they imply, she wasn't able to have children, and no child that's watching it is necessarily going to get that.
No.
But it's just so profound, all the things they talk about. And talking about crying, the sleepy time episode,
yeah.
I just have to hear the music for that.
Yeah.
And I just get goosebumps. And my son wanted to buy the book. There's a really beautiful big book of it. And I was like, oh, please don't buy that. Please don't buy that. Because now I have to cry every time. But it's so beautiful.
It is really beautiful. And I think I'm just realizing now as we talk about it, Bluey wasn't the first show to do humor on multiple levels. Like I don't know what the first was, but I do remember being a kid, and that's what I remember parents talking about that because I was a child, about Shrek, which was maybe 2000. I remember them saying like, oh, there's jokes that adults get in there as well. And to me, it felt like that was new. Maybe that had been around a little bit, but so Bluey does humor on multiple levels as well. But I'm just thinking now, I wonder if it's the first show to kind of do emotions on multiple levels, possibly.
Yeah, it certainly gets you good, doesn't it?
You're listening to The Art of Being a Mum with my mum, Alison Newman.
I want to ask you about the exercise episode where, for people who don't know, there was the beginning. It's probably easy if you just watch it, but there was some stuff that people were sort of saying, oh, this is a bit too much, focusing on your weight as being a problem in your life, and what Chili on the scales, like sighing that she's, weighs too much or whatever. The fact that they actually changed it, I think it shows how, but, they're able to listen to the broader voice of society and recognise that maybe, something's not quite right and be able to adjust it, which I thought was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I loved that they changed it. It was, in my opinion, a rare misstep. I was, after talking to some people and hearing some people's experiences, fully on board with it needing to be changed. It was something, but I don't want my daughter thinking that a scale should influence how she sees herself. want her growing up thinking that how she sees herself should be dictated by a number on a machine.
Yeah.
And so it was disappointing that had happened. I'm really, personally, my honest opinion is that I'm really happy that they changed it, and not proud, but like a kind of like, it's like you know, people go, I've seen comments where people go, well, cancel culture or the woke mob gone mad or whatever the comment is. I'm thinking, but this is a good example, I think, of someone not quite getting something right, listening to the response and adjusting it. That's not canceling at all. Like we're not, like the episode's still there and debatably better. Well, sorry, in my opinion, much better, but it's not, it doesn't take away from the story at all. There's nothing, there's no damage. No one is hurt by it being changed. However, people might have been hurt. And in my opinion, it was a negative image to display to young people the way it was. And so I do think it was hurtful before. So it's just a positive thing. And I think we should encourage people that if you have a misstep, if you make a mistake, like listen to what people are saying, take it on board, make changes where you can.
Yeah. And they're not too sort of I don't know what the word is, arrogant to say, no, this is it, this is what we're presenting, take it or leave it. They're actually, show their humanity and to reflect on what's like we were talking about before with the comedians, what's sort of acceptable and appropriate to show and talk about in particular ways. Yeah.
It is a particular thing that is, I was pretty surprised that I know that the show would go through a lot of filters, and I was kind of surprised that it made it through those filters. However, I do think, and it's evidence if you look through comments, and I had to stop looking through comments because it was making me, it's like getting me kind of hot under the collar. But it's evidence that if you don't have experience in those areas, you can't see what the issue is. However, if you listen to people who do have experience in those areas, and if you listen to the experts in those areas, it was pretty clear, in my opinion, that there were issues. So, it was very, I had to stop reading because it was getting me too amped up.
Oh, yeah. There'd be a different kind of comedy coming out of you as a result of reading those comments.
Yeah.
Oh, God. It's pretty hard.
That's a whole different thing. It's like, I don't know. And my opinions on this change from time to time, and I'm, growing my understanding, but I just think comment sections, they're not a place for nuanced conversations.
No, no, it's just, they're not great. And I notice some, like, I don't know if it's happening more often, but people are actually turning off the comments and not allowing people to make comments, which is, I think it's better because I don't think anything positive can come from a conversation in the comment section necessarily.
Well, it's interesting. Early on with TikTok, so I joined TikTok in 2020, like a lot of people did during the pandemic. And it's still a little bit this way, but I remember early on, it was really like there was kind of a saying, the comments are better than the videos. Like everyone was like really funny and creative, and the comment sections generally were really great.
Yeah.
And different people would have different experiences, but in my experience, that was the case for a while. It has, maybe as things grow and they become more diluted, as more and more people come on, they kind of all become the same and homogenized.
Yeah.
But there's there are places where comment sections are better than other sections. There are some that are really toxic, some that are pretty good. and then a bit in between.
Mm. Yeah, because I had this chat with someone, I can't remember who it was. No, it's irrelevant. But the fact that I don't think you're ever going to change someone's mind through the comment section. Like someone who's got this really firm held belief, you can talk as rationally as you like to them, and they're not going to stop and go, actually, now that one person has said that to me, I'm going to, reassess my entire belief system that I've held my whole life.
Yeah, and I think by the time it depends what the topic is, but they're not in a position to change their minds either. They're at war.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm on the front lines here fighting for my ideology, and you don't. When you're on the front lines of a war, you don't often jump to the other team, do you? Like it's like that's not the place to be. I'm not sorry. It's not the place to be discussing it. You can, if that's how you choose to discuss it, you can go for it. But I see people defending ideologies, both ideologies I agree with and ones I don't in my comment section. And I do think to people who I agree with, I'm like, all power to you. You keep fighting, but I couldn't, that's too much. I couldn't, I see comments pop up from months ago. People will talk for months back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm like, guys, this isn't going anywhere. I think you just need to drop this and move on.
Yeah,
neither of you have budged an inch in 2 months.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's like the stalemate on the front lines.
However, to be fair, there has been occasions where people go at each other. I have noticed in my comment section sometimes when I get a notification, and I think like, oh, that was pretty harsh. And I'm like, should I delete that? Should I step in and say something? There have been occasions where I'll go, oh, I'll just leave it. And then a few hours later, the person will go, you know what that was? I'm sorry that I snapped back a bit hard there, that I didn't mean to do that.
Full credit to them.
Or I have also seen on occasions, not firmly held ideologies, but over smaller things, they will go like, I do understand that now. Thanks. So it's not like it's impossible. I just think what I'm talking about is where whatever it is triggers something bigger. And I see that occasionally. I made a video about that I don't think that it's a good way to learn how to swim by randomly throwing a kid into a lake, which was I used a scene as an illustration from an old John Wayne movie where he tosses his kid into a lake.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be really universal. That was a real lesson for me. I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of people who have different opinions to me. And there was a lot of people who agreed. A majority, like there was vast more people who saw it did agree, but there were a lot of people who pushed back. But there were a lot of comments on that video, which was a video about a parenting style that used words like soy milk, pronouns, drag queens.
Yep.
And obviously people had seen it and identified it as a political statement, and so made assumptions that this one thing represented this big thing.
Yeah.
And so that is something that I think these people engulf their whole lives. That would be a way they see themselves. I see myself as this certain political alignment, and all the content I consume is like this. And then when I'm on the internet and I see a video that I think contradicts that, I'm going to make a comment about how this guy's a soy boy or something like that. And I'm like, that's the type of person that one comment on the internet saying like, well, actually that, science has come a long way, and that's maybe not the best way to do this anymore. That's not going to change their opinions.
No.
Yeah.
But isn't that funny though, that you've got to almost got to police yourself so much because of the associations people are going to make with things like that? They're just going to jump on it. So there's a lady who I had on the podcast, she's a feminist, and she observes things, right?
Yeah.
So she doesn't tell you what you should do with your parenting style. She takes, looks at all these different styles and gives, her opinion on them, and an educated opinion. You know, like she's been in academia for a long time and a lecturer. So it's not just, you know, someone like me just going, hey, this is really great or this isn't. And she's got to be really careful too, because the things she takes it from, like the crunchy mums or the what are they called? The wives, something wives. Oh, I can't think what they're called now, but like people straight away see that video and think that that's what she is. So something blew up for her not long ago, and she actually went, okay, people, like I've noticed this is what's happening. Please, can we not do this anymore? And I'll be careful what I do, sort of thing, you know, to clear the air with everybody, because it just turned into a bit of a shit show for a bit. So yeah, that's the thing. You when you're in that space, I mean, luckily I haven't had that happen to me, but I'd be conscious too of like reflecting. I try to stay down the middle. Like I do share on this podcast my political views, mostly because the people I interview feel the same way. So we can chat about stuff. Or if I'm talking to an American, I find it really interesting to see what they think, depending on what state they're in, of how they feel about things, you know. And I'm not saying things are, you know, this is right or this is wrong. I'm just talking about it. So I also have to be a little bit careful that I'm not seen as pushing a certain agenda, which I'm a bit mindful of. But anyway, people know what I think. If you don't like it, just don't listen to it.
Yeah, it's been that particular video was a learning curve for me, not to make assumptions on what other people might think. But it's only been since making parenting videos that I've had a few instances of this, because before I was a parent, you know, as I said, most of the things were taking silly things seriously. So it rarely offended people or not offended, but elicited a strong response. And so, yeah, I am on a journey of, that self-filtering is interesting, you know, trying to take on different perspectives of how this will be perceived. Not to say that you shouldn't say it, but I just don't know if I'm the person. There's some things I am confident to express.
Yep.
And then there's some other times where I was like, well, you know, with parenting, I'm not a parenting expert. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, well, am I the person who should be sharing about this? Do I have the knowledge in the background to back it up? Or have I just heard it somewhere else? And then I also think I'm not a parenting educator. Like, the parenting content I make is meant to be relatable and fun, and it's meant to alleviate or to create some humor in what can be some difficult times for people. That's what my goal is. It's not. And so sometimes I do think like, oh, well, leave that up to the people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. So speaking of parenting comedy, so you've got your daughter, you've got a little fella who's, how old is he now? He's not that old, is he?
Yeah, Finch, he's 4 months old.
4 months old. And there was a lovely, very funny post you put up the other day about the pockets in the baby clothes.
Yeah.
It's just like you see it all the time as a parent. And it's like, I loved that you made that connection and just, you know, like, because you see it and sometimes you just forget that it's there, but to actually call it out and go, now, hang on, I don't think my child really needs pockets in his shorts when he's 4 months old. And I loved that it got some traction too. One of the UK sites picked it up and promote. Yeah,
The Independent.
The Independent, that's right. Yeah. So stuff like that, that's good, you know. We can all have a laugh about that. That
is true. That was the first time I had observed that. But, you know, I wasn't the first to make that observation, which has been pointed out to me now. But,
oh, dear.
You know, it is something that lots of people can relate to, yeah.
So do you find that, like, obviously we all know parenting is really hard. It's, you know, the lack of sleep, the challenges, the, you know, the pressure it puts on yourself and your relationship and all that sort of stuff. Do you find that working through that with your comedy, is that a release for you? Does that sort of help you get through tough times?
I wouldn't say, I think making things, yeah, like being creative is really important to me, as self-expression. And I think self-expression helps you understand yourself and how you feel about yourself. You know, I want to be being creative and I want to be creating things. Parenting makes everything more difficult. Like, so yeah, it comes with challenges, but I never stopped. When I had my first child, or when we had our first child in 2020, I was unemployed and it was during COVID. So it was a very strange time. And I think creating things helped me just with a sense of like having something. Well, you know, even before we had the kid in 2020, Peaches, you know, have something to do that day, basically. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like some type of sense of achievement at the end of the day. But I also got that sense of achievement from parenting as well. You know, the times that the first times I was able to look after the kids myself, I did feel like a sense I have achieved something today. But yeah, definitely being creative helps that as well.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. I want to ask about a specific question about mum guilt. It's something that I talk to all my mums about on the podcast. It's this sort of universal thing that people know about, and they either feel it or they don't, which I think is wonderful. And I find that interesting too, that differences in people, you know. Is that something that you've sort of heard about? Or so two parts of the question, I guess. What your thoughts on it are, I guess, and I'm not asking you to, you know, divulge private things about your life, but, you know, is it something that you're conscious of with your partner? And secondly, do you think there is such a thing as dad guilt in the same? I mean, I suppose it can't be the same way because it's slightly different. But yeah, just what's your overall thoughts on that, I guess?
My overall thoughts on mum guilt. I think mums carry, well, parents, but generally mums carry a lot of guilt. You know, that, and I don't think that's very fair because they're doing a great job. But, you know, sometimes I think some people feel like that they could be doing more, or they're not doing the right job, or they're not doing it right, or something like that. And that's not true. You know, it's the type of thing that I think if you're asking that question, then you do care. You know, it's like if you're conscious of that, that means you are doing a great job because you're trying to do the best for your kids, and that's you're doing it by even thinking of that question. But the fact that that question is coming up for you is a sign that you are doing a great job. I can't speak to. I think mum guilt sometimes comes around like working. I can't speak to that on behalf of mums. I have experienced a smaller amount of that myself, and so I do think I haven't spoke to other dads. I'm sure they experience a similar thing, but I definitely I work strange hours in radio, so sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning, and these are times, you know, my daughter is she'll sometimes scream and say like don't go, and you know that's very difficult to leave. And I do think like, oh, am I doing the right thing by working these strange hours? Because, you know, when she's going to bed at night, should it be really consistent that she knows who's going to be there, tucking her in? When she's wake up in the morning, should it be really consistent? Like, I feel guilty about, it makes me really sad to feel, the idea that she wake up and, dad's not there in the morning because he's gone to work. So I do feel guilt around that. But I also feel like in my instance, and the way that I process it is like there's benefits and there's downsides and upsides to a lot of things. And in my instance, the downside is working strange hours. There are difficulties around bedtimes and wake up times. The upside is I'm often very flexible during the day.
Yeah.
And so I'm often around a lot, and I might be doing some work from home, but it's very flexible. I am able to go to things if I need to, or look after them for a little while if there's some type of, parenting disaster.
Yeah.
And so I do think like, if I was working a conventional job, for a lot of dads, if you're working 9 to 5 and you're in the city and you live in the suburbs and you're not getting home to 6:30, you have very limited time to see the kids during the week. And so I think like that's a huge challenge that people have. And so we have our challenges, but if I was doing the other one, there would be challenges as well. So
yeah,
that's kind of how I rationalize it myself. I'm like, well, that I feel guilty about this, but then if I was doing the other one, I'd probably feel guilty as well. So yeah. And like, well, we have to work.
Yeah. It's the reality of life, isn't it? Yeah. And that's the thing. You make it work how best you can. I think that's what one of the themes that keeps coming through when I chat to mums is like, I think we all, maybe there's been 2 people I've spoken to. One person didn't even know what mum guilt was. They had to Google it. And I thought that was pretty amazing. But yeah, we all feel, and we all sort of like that, like try to make it work as best we can and be kind to ourselves and know that, like you said, if we're even questioning it, we're already a good mum.
Yeah, 100%. I think generally I do think dad guilt is a thing. What dads generally don't get is the societal pressure dads get it pretty easy, in the sense of like, there's a classic kind of trope of like, the dad's got the kids at the playground. It's like, oh, wow, such a great dad.
Yeah.
Whereas for a mum, no one blinks an eyelid and just goes, well, of course, mum has the kids at the playground. That's a part of being a mum.
Yeah.
So the pressure and the judgment that's put on mums is significantly different to what's put on dads. That goes for the internet too, by the way. When I talk about comment sections and things like that, I know for a fact very well that I get it significantly easier than women, people in minorities, and also people who are educators in areas like parenting and stuff like that. I look through some of those comment sections. I thought, how do you deal with this on a day-to-day basis? That must be so difficult. So, yeah, guys get much easier, unfortunately. Hopefully, I'm hoping, and I look to my daughter, and I hope, and I'm optimistic that she's going to grow up in a better world that's moving to being a better place for her. And I think it is. I hope it is.
Oh, I feel like it is. I mean, just by having conversations about stuff and challenging each other, I feel like, that's what gets the ball rolling. Because I was speaking to someone the other day about this, like you can't just do one big thing and everything's going to change. Like it's all these little things, all the little steps and all the little things shifting to try and, move that. I don't know what the word is, that thing that moves.
Yeah. It's slow. I think the younger generation are pretty cool. They're making some good moves. So yeah, I do get hopeful.
Absolutely. I think that's a lovely note to end on. Zach, thank you for coming on. It's been so nice talking to you, and thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability and for your funniness too. I've enjoyed it.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure being on. Thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, Alison.
Awesome.
Thanks for your company today. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to consider leaving us a review, following or subscribing to the podcast, or even sharing it with a friend you think might be interested. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please get in touch with us via the link in the show notes.